GTO90. If you've been in the DigiByte community for a while, you're probably familiar that I'm one of the core developers. Have been around since, I think September 2016 is when I first was introduced to DigiByte. Became a core developer pretty fast. And that led into my volunteering with the DigiByte Alliance. And so I sit on that board as a VP, trying to help the Alliance grow its education and its support for the DigiByte community. And part of that leads us to today, where we're going to provide a little bit of a talk about Taproot and what it is, what it represents. It's probably the most significant Bitcoin upgrade since probably 2016, 2017. It's a culmination of three different BIPs, Bitcoin Improvement Proposals, 340, 341, and 342. I believe it was introduced in Bitcoin 0.19. And, while it was, obviously its genesis was Bitcoin, any UTXO derivative of Bitcoin's blockchain is going to have adopted that code just by keeping up to date with upstream changes on Bitcoin. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. But first, I think a little bit of a deeper history on what those are. I kind of spaced on what the previous significant upgrade was, SegWit. So this is the biggest upgrade to the Bitcoin network since SegWit. And so we'll start with a brief history, not just dates and events, but kind of understanding, the technical challenges as it was designed to solve, and the careful development process that it went through. If you're all aware of how changes get made to the Bitcoin blockchain, it's the exact same process that the DigiByte blockchain goes through. It's done through a Bitcoin improvement proposal, where somebody makes a recommendation. We're going to talk about that somebody with respect to Taproot here in a little bit. But those go through a process where the community proposes some changes. It's then reviewed and debated, and those are eventually either rejected or accepted. In the case of Taproot, it was accepted. And then it moves from the improvement proposal stage to actual development. And then it finally makes its way merged into the code base, where one final round of approval happens, which is the miners. Miners have to signal, as this is a soft fork change, it has to be approval has to be signaled by the miners. I think it's 80% or more have to approve before something gets actually activated. So we're going to dive into a little bit deeper of what Taproot is, its purpose, its architecture, and that means we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on what is BIP 340 as it relates to the different types of signatures that it implemented, 341, which is Taproot itself, and then finally 342, which is TapScript. And hopefully with a little bit of a better knowledge of those three BIPs, the group here and the community generally will have a little bit of a better foundation and a knowledge of why that benefits the DigiByte blockchain. So first up, Taproot's development history. Again, it demonstrates the very sometimes painful, methodical, and long process that changes have to go through. So Gregory Maxwell actually initially proposed Taproot in January of 2018. And this wasn't just a technical improvement. It really represented a fundamentally new way to think about transaction privacy and script execution on the blockchain. And fast forward a few years, as that percolated within the community, October 2020, the code to implement all of that was merged into Bitcoin Core, and that was led by, I'm going to not pronounce this last name right, Peter Willie or Weil. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, Wuille. And that came after extensive peer review and testing. This process involved implementing three different interconnected BIPs, as I previously stated. So BIP 340 introduced Schnorr signatures, which provides a more efficient and privacy-preserving signature scheme. BIP 341 is what defined Taproot itself, and that enabled brand new addresses called pay to Taproot addresses and brand new outputs that those come with. And then BIP 342 introduced TapScript, which was an enhancement of Bitcoin's existing scripting capabilities. And then fast forward a little bit more, in June of 2021, once that code was released into the wild, again, version 0.19, it took a whole another 6 months or so, 7 months. Math in public, I'm not very good at it, so I might be off by a little bit, but June 2021, miner consensus actually happened with 90% of miners signaling that they approved of the activation of Taproot. And then on November 2021, the activation actually happened at block 709,632. And so that's how that happened for Bitcoin. And because DigiByte is a derivative of Bitcoin, and because we have been over the last many years now integrating version 0.22 of Bitcoin, that means that Taproot comes cargoed along the way. There's been a lot of debate in the community about whether we should leave that disabled or enabled, and it ultimately was decided by the core developers that there's, if it's good for Bitcoin, it's good for us, and DigiByte actually needs more engagement and more adoption, and we need more transactions in our blocks, and so we couldn't come up with enough negatives to answer the positives. And so we went ahead and merged that. The activation heights, where the miners will have an opportunity to signal their approval, again, so that just means that the code has been activated, and we have officially set dates by which the miners have an opportunity to activate Taproot, and that starts January 10th of 2025. And the window will close if we don't get enough miners to signal approval on January 10th, 2027. So it's a 2-year window that we're giving miners an opportunity to signal activation of Taproot. There's a few other things that also have to come along with that. Even though the code exists, there's going to have to be wallet and exchange support. As I mentioned, there's brand new address types. Pay to Taproot addresses are a completely new address scheme. They have a different prefix than other DigiByte addresses. And so to benefit from those, you'll have to actually create a new wallet with that address and send transactions with that new wallet. Additionally, I think it's probably good to point out that these addresses are also backwards compatible, so you can send DigiByte from a Taproot address to a non-Taproot address and vice versa. You just won't get to enjoy any of the nice Taproot features unless you're sending to another Taproot address. So that's a little bit of the history and the background. Next up, we'll talk a little bit about the different blockchains that implement Taproot. As again, obviously, Bitcoin was the first. And as I shared, any UTXO Bitcoin derivative is going to have gotten that code cargoed along for the ride. And so that includes Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, and obviously DigiByte. DigiByte has some minor differences in the way we handle fees, and we've got multi-shield and some of the multi-algorithm stuff that does require a little bit of refactoring our end to fully support, and the developers are actually working through a fee bug right now to get that resolved. And then there's the Stacks blockchain, which implemented Taproot a little bit differently than Bitcoin, as they're not a one-for-one derivative of the Bitcoin blockchain. But for DigiByte, the diversity of our implementation is valuable. Given our multi-algo mining system and faster block times, we think that Taproot is going to be even better than it is on Bitcoin because our transaction fees are much lower and our blocks are much faster. We think that what's possible on the DigiByte blockchain with Taproot is going to be much better than what you would enjoy on Bitcoin or Litecoin or other blockchains that have also implemented Taproot. So a little bit about the technical architecture. We'll dive a little bit deeper here. It really delivers 3 key improvements. It's got enhanced privacy. And that's done through Schnorr signatures that make multi-signature transactions look like a single signature. You've got the pay to Taproot outputs that hide complex spending conditions. And then you've got something new that's called Merkleized alternative script trees. And those are awesome because they only reveal executed conditions and they keep everything else private. They also improve efficiency. So signature aggregation is reduced. It results in reduced transaction sizes, which is important. Makes our blocks more efficient. The scripting is also more efficient when validating scripts, and it optimizes public key operations. It's also got expanded smart contract capabilities. This is what I think a lot of the community is the most excited about. Taproot brings with it enhanced opcodes, which is a more flexible script path, and it better supports more complicated conditions. It's not an EVM type of solution for smart contracts, but it is a much more robust smart contract platform. And so we can see a lot of really awesome use cases develop on top of DigiByte here in the future because of that. Some of the key technical components of Schnorr signatures, they're a linear signature aggregation. They have native multi-signature support and simplified public key operations. Masked, the Merkle tree of script conditions is added. It only reveals paths. The only things that's revealed in a masked transaction is the path, and the paths are the only things that are published. Everything else is kept private, and it reduces the on-chain footprint. And then finally, TapScript. It's an enhanced script versioning. It adds a new signature validation rule set, and it provides for improved scripting capabilities. All right. So we're moving really fast through it, not even a half hour. I've provided some key resources here where if you guys really want to get into the weeds and dive deep, you can grab a copy of these slides. I don't know if, Laura, if you're going to share these out, but they do have the links in there. So you can go read more.
I will post this
Great.
in the resources channel.
Excellent, because these links will actually take you to the BIPs themselves, so you can dive into their weeds if you want to get that deep. So you can dive deep into Schnorr signatures, dive deep into pay to Taproot, and finally TapScript and how that's an evolved version of Bitcoin script, which will enable some advanced smart contracts. And then there's some development resources down there at the bottom for any developers on the call here. So if you're looking to understand the implementation details, you can visit the Bitcoin Core GitHub repo. You can also visit Bitcoin Optech Taproot Workshop. That offers a pretty cool on-hand or hands-on example and testing scenarios. And then finally, you can go to the DigiByte Core repository where you can learn more about our activation of Taproot and all of the things that we had to do to get it to work on our own repository. And with that, I think we can open it up to some interactive questions, some back and forth, or whatever the group wants to do here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, GTO, for breaking that all down. And yeah, so ask away. If you have questions, unmute yourself and ask away.
I have a couple questions, or one question, but it's like with the 8.22 upgrade, we can go look in the repository and it shows all the significant changes. Can you talk about some of the other implementations? I know that the descriptor wallets was like something new, and what was the other one? I know that to be able to get into like the Bison wallet, there's talk of like a SPV wallet that and then it needs neutrino filters. But some of the other code implementations, could you go over some of those things and how that benefits, how 8.22 kind of the upgrades benefit the users?
GTO, if you're talking, we can't hear you. I think you're
Yep,
muted.
I was on mute. I was saying, I don't know what the exact percentage breakdown would be, but I'm going to venture a guess that somewhere between 70 and 80% of the commits and the 8.22 upgrade are really more about making the code base better, easier to maintain. A lot of the RPC functionality has been improved. There's some new RPC endpoints, and there's, I think, one or two that have been deprecated. That would be the most. That'd be the other thing that would impact users or developers specifically. So pay attention to the changes in the RPC methods that are available. Other than that, there aren't any real significant user-facing changes outside of Taproot. Taproot's the big deal. It makes our blocks more efficient. It gives us a better scripting facility, and it allows for some adoption and use cases that we haven't even been able to contemplate up until now. So, and that's unfortunately, again, really a developer-centric thing. There's some privacy features and capabilities that I think you can use just by leveraging a Taproot address. And there's some multi-sig functionality that I think would be nice for some end users. But again, if you're not a developer and you're not building new use cases, I'm not really sure that the 8.22 changes are altogether exciting. But if you are a developer, I think it's a brand new era for DigiByte. It's really going to unlock the ability to do some things that we've never been able to do with DigiByte before. Native assets on L1, smart contracts on L1 without having to use a second layer system. All of that stuff is really, really exciting, and I think hopefully will lead to a broader adoption of our beloved blockchain. Not for nothing, because our transaction fees are so small. It makes the cost of running those kinds of use cases on our blockchain much more affordable and much faster and much more efficient than they would be on any other blockchain. So, you can do a standard Google search and see all of the things that Taproot has brought to Bitcoin. I know that's part of the debate that's been happening in our community for the last couple of years. Some folks have felt that, that there's more risks involved with activating it than there are benefits. I'm not sure I agree with that anymore. Outside of that, we're going to have to wait for the developers to create some really cool stuff for the users to be able to really benefit by it. Again, it's backwards compatible. So any impacts to SPV wallets or any other wallet, or even integration with exchanges, there's no changes required. You're not really required to upgrade. Everything will work backwards compatible. Of course, we want you to upgrade because we want exchanges and wallets to provide Taproot support, right? But outside of that, again, it's really developer focused and not so much user focused. A lot of that's my opinion, though. Other developers and other community members might have different opinions about that. But that's my take.
Thank you for that.
It's a super weedy technical topic, Laura. I don't, it doesn't shock me that folks don't want to dive in and start asking questions.
No, I totally understand. I actually have a question, and we've been talking with the UTXO Alliance and on like education initiatives and getting everybody kind of trying to work together and that sort of thing. So this was one of the questions that I was thinking about when I was researching this myself. In this integration, does this open up more compatibility with other chains who have also upgraded to this integration, or is that not really a relevant thing? Like, does this make this more cross compatible? For example,
you might have to give me some more context to go on. I mean, cross-chain compatibility isn't really a thing per se. If you send a transaction from DigiByte to Bitcoin, that's going to get lost, right? I'm not really aware of a whole lot of platforms, and it's not my domain. This is such a huge domain and community that we swim in. There might be some platforms and tools that enable cross-chain, work. I think that our vision for Rosetta would be something that would provide an abstraction layer that would give you a veneer, or I should say a facade of cross-chain compatibility. But that's so far out into the future that it's probably not even worth talking about right now.
Well, honestly,
But
that answers my question, because I was wondering, like, how would that? I was thinking actually about Rosetta when I was thinking about this question. Is with each enhancement, what does that do in the kind of broader landscape, and how does it affect, like, how DigiByte works with other chains, or how developers of DigiByte could work with other chains, and if this would have an effect on that at all?
well, clearly, because we're a very clean derivative of Bitcoin. Granted, we are behind several minor versions. We could certainly keep ourselves updated to the latest Bitcoin core. There's a lot of arguments to do so, and there's a lot of counter arguments not to do so. But because we are presently, all of our interfaces are one for one exactly the same as Bitcoin's. It makes it the same. It makes it just as easy to deploy support for DigiByte in any given centralized exchange or decentralized exchange, or really any application that's built on top of Bitcoin could, with very little effort, be modified to run exactly on DigiByte, because again, our interfaces are exactly the same as Bitcoin's. Our internals, what makes DigiByte is different, right? DigiByte's not a fork, meaning we didn't copy and paste Bitcoin. That's why if you look at the way we've merged Bitcoin in, and this was a huge raging debate that was very fractious years ago about how best to go about merging in DigiByte, or latest Bitcoin code into DigiByte. And there was a whole lot of folks that thought you could just, fork Bitcoin and just apply the changes that, what's different about DigiByte. And unfortunately, folks just don't understand that we're not a copy of Bitcoin. We do use Bitcoin's core, but our what makes DigiByte is not just layered on top of Bitcoin. It's integrated into that source code directly. So the coupling is really tight. So all that to say that at the code layer, there's really no interoperability. They're completely separate code bases. You couldn't swap one to one very cleanly. But the interfaces, so the RPC methods, the way that external systems communicate with our blockchain is one for one. It's exactly the same as Bitcoin. So as long as we keep ourselves up to date with Bitcoin, like I was mentioning earlier, 8.22 does deprecate a couple of RPC calls, and it changes the internals of a few others. And so developers will need to make sure they look into the docs to make sure that they're paying attention to that. But again, because we're behind Bitcoin, most exchanges and most wallets have already taken those into account, and so we really don't have an issue there. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling at this point. I'm not really sure if I'm answering your question, but hopefully I am.
You 100% answered it. Thank you so much. Sorry to throw that at you. I was thinking about my questions beforehand, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is interoperability. Is that affected here?" So.
I think for me, one of the most, and you know this because I've been talking to you about Rosetta for years now, right? Internally, but one of the most exciting possibilities that I think Rosetta offers that is really not talked about in the Rosetta community is building those extensions to the spec that I've shared with you privately and some others in the community that would allow developers through a more robust specification to use multiple blockchains to build applications. That's not to say that you could create cross-chain transactions per se, but with something like Rosetta, you could say build an application that leverages 3 or 4 different blockchains, right? And sends certain messages and certain data to one blockchain and other data to another, to improve security and all kinds of other really interesting use cases, that's not possible today. But also to be able to build tools that can talk to multiple blockchains and present, very similar metadata, that makes creating all kinds of analytical tools possible that are not possible today across different blockchains. Hence the word Rosetta, being able to kind of be the one translation to rule them all, right? To talk to all the blockchains and, through one single interface versus, I have to know how to talk to Bitcoin. I got to know how to talk to Ethereum. I got to know how to talk to Solana and so on and so forth. That's not a scalable solution. And so I think that's the thing that's really exciting about Rosetta.
Okay, GTO, thanks again for coming to this space and doing this. I guess I'll go ahead and play a little bit of devil's advocate here. So I think just from this DigiByte socials, the largest criticism of Taproot, I'd say, would be the concern about what they call at least network spam. Is there a threat to the chain posed about being bogged down by increased new types of activities, such as like on-chain assets? And are there ways to get around this, like higher fees for Taproot transactions, putting things on chain, or maybe more use of the testnet?
Yeah, so definitely more use of the testnet. That is just a developer hygiene thing that I think we've done pretty poorly at in the past. We've got some community members that have done some unnice things to our blockchain. We have tens of thousands. I don't even know how many they did many years ago. Somebody was doing a test with assets on DigiByte that actually used the public blockchain to inject a metric ton of spam, useless transactions that absolutely have no value whatsoever. And so that's not cool. So we definitely need to educate developers to use testnet, and at the very least, developers should be using RegTest, which is literally your local test network. You should be using those environments for testing your applications before you do anything on chain. Yes, our transaction fees right now are really, really low, so it does pose the risk of people, injecting a lot of spam. But again, if you look into the commit history for 8.22, I think you'll find a commit, I don't know which one it is off the top of my head, where we did actually 10x the fees. So it's going to be more expensive, which honestly, our miners are going to like that. There's another counter argument and counter narrative that have happened in our community over the last, 10 years, really. And that is, what happens when the last DigiByte is mined? Right. So if the last DigiByte is mined, there's no more mining rewards. And if there's no mining rewards, then what's the incentive for miners to keep, mining our blockchain and keeping it secure? Well, if you have something like Taproot, where people are paying transaction fees to, put data on the blockchain, run smart contracts, create assets, whatever, that's going to increase the size of our blocks. That's going to increase the transaction fees. That's going to make sure our miners are happy, and it gives them an incentive to keep our blockchain going well beyond our last block reward, right? So there's a lot of counter arguments. Can spam exist? Absolutely, but again, this is my personal opinion. Where I was also very concerned about that, over the last year, I started to just think about it like email. Email is still probably fundamentally one of the greatest technological advancements in our lifetime, right? I mean, hands down, even though we're all using chatbots and Discords and Signals and messages and God knows how many social media apps, the fact remains that email is still an absolutely critical protocol on the internet, bar none. And we all suffer from spam. The developers of the email protocol probably thought about this problem too. But the sheer existence of the risk didn't dissuade them from releasing the protocol so that humanity could enjoy its benefits. other industries and other developers and other technologies and other solutions can and will spring up around these issues in our nation. And it's not just an issue for DigiByte, by the way, it's an issue for all blockchains that have adopted Bitcoin's BIP 340, 341, and 342. Bitcoin itself has a raging debate going on in its community about, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? I've come around, like I said, to believe that I would rather provide the opportunities that the technology provides to the broader community than to withhold it from the community out of some irrational fear about spam. And I would rather the developer community and the industry writ large solve for the spam problem. So that's my personal position on it. I didn't always think that way. I also thought that we should withhold it. In fact, we did for many years, right? We started 8.22, I think it was almost 4 years ago now. And so, this entire Taproot discussion just inside of Bitcoin Core has been a raging topic for years. So it's taken just Bitcoin Core developers many years to come around to thinking, okay, this is probably all right. And the community will come up with solutions to mitigate or deal with the spam, if that even happens, right? Or if it even happens at a level that's a problem. Now, technologically speaking, is it going to slow the blockchain down? Absolutely not. 15-second block times are enforced by the protocol. You're going to have 15-second blocks no matter how big the transactions are and no matter how big the blocks are. So we don't need to worry about that either. The only real downside to it that I could agree to is that it's going to take more space on disk. But you know what? Welcome to computing. We've been dealing with explosion in storage growth since the beginning, since the NASA space programs. So we're not going to stop storage growth, and quite honestly, that's not a problem that I think is altogether interesting for the blockchain community anyway. And so again, personal opinion, I'm espousing, GTO90's personal opinions and all these things. Others might feel differently. But that's where I'm at.
Awesome, man. Thank you sincerely for the response. To me, this upgrade almost feels a bit inverted, almost like it's the Taproot code that's getting a upgrade of the chain being DigiByte. Or if you want to look at it in like a car analogy, like a beefier engine in the Taproot car. So excited to see how this plays out. And thanks again for joining us for this conversation.
Yeah, no worries. I think you nailed it. That's kind of unfortunately, that's our sweet spot. That's where we just don't get enough industry recognition. We're the fastest blockchain, we're the most secure blockchain, and we have really low fees as a result. And so, what's possible for the average, global developer to achieve on our blockchain versus try doing any of this on Bitcoin and how much that costs, or how long it takes for a transaction to confirm for you to even test your application, your smart contract. I mean, it's just the possibilities that DigiByte opens with this technology is so much greater and so much more approachable, and so much more inclusive than it is with something like Bitcoin. And that's, I mean, hey, they did it first, and we stand on their shoulders. So I'm not trying to take anything away from Bitcoin. It is what it is. But like you said, it's like taking it's like taking a Volkswagen Beetle and putting a LS, motor from a Corvette in it, right? So
Love it.
Anybody else have any other questions for GTO? All right.
Absolutely no questions. We stunned them.
Well, there is one point that actually was a question that I asked you privately when all of the conversation with the merge happened, and not to over emphasize it, but there is the asset layer that's in production now that people have been building on, and my question to you, and I'll just post this publicly, is, what happens to that if Taproot, is integrated? And I thought your answer was really good with that, and I think it's an important point to, if nobody has any other questions, maybe to end with, because it's precedent in the community, and also I would like to reiterate because we are getting close to time, before we wrap up, there is an ongoing conversation on GitHub, and please, if you're interested in this in a deep way, or if you're invested, if you're a developer, please go to GitHub and start that conversation. And I know Twitter and just and Reddit are places where a lot of people talk, and I totally understand that. But where actual movement and development happens, and not just pontification, but actual work. We really want to get people to have that conversation on GitHub in a deeper way.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. GitHub is free. It doesn't cost you any money at all. You just need an email address. So if you don't have a GitHub account, go get one. We welcome everybody to participate in there. We're a small development community, so we don't have the infrastructure and the resources that Bitcoin or even Litecoin have, or other UTXOs. As we grow our adoption, we will get more infrastructure that'll make communicating with developers and having these debates a little bit easier. But for now, because we're resource constrained, everything happens on GitHub. We have a wiki there now you can participate in, discussion forums. You can ask questions. If there's a pull request like this one that went in for Taproot, and you've got questions or you want to be a part of that conversation, you can absolutely be a part of that conversation inside of GitHub. So don't be a stranger. Don't feel intimidated. You don't have to stay away. You can get in there and get involved and have your voice be heard. So don't shy away. So to Laura's point about the existing DigiAssets X, I think is what she's referring to. I love that exists. I wish more things like DigiAssets X exist. I wish it wasn't the only thing. I know that might be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, but what I'm advocating for is competition. The more competition that if folks need to start thinking about DigiByte, like I just mentioned, email, it's a protocol, right? Even it's the code that's on GitHub, the protocol itself, it even isn't DigiByte. DigiByte isn't DigiByte until miners and node operators actually deploy the protocol and run the protocol and the network on the internet. It's just a protocol. It doesn't pick winners and losers on what gets built, what transactions get accepted or not accepted, and so on and so forth. The protocol defines the rules of the game. And to that point, just because we're integrating Taproot doesn't mean that all of a sudden DigiAssets X doesn't work anymore. That couldn't be further from the truth. I hope DigiAssets X continues to move into the future. Heck, maybe the developers of DigiAssets X take a look at Taproot and figure out how they can improve DigiAssets X using some of Taproot's capabilities. I don't know. I don't know enough about how DigiAssets X is built or implemented. But the bottom line is that the upgrade to DigiByte to version 8.22 doesn't change DigiAssets X at all. So, have at it, grow it, compete. I hope more developers outside of DigiAssets X come and build their assets frameworks. I mean, look at Bitcoin, right? You've got ordinals, and you've got I forget what the runes, and you've got all these different frameworks that are kind of popping up for how to build assets on Bitcoin. And there's not one clear winner, right? It's just other developers in the community building things on top of Bitcoin. That's exactly what we want for DigiByte, right? We don't want to scare development away. We don't want to scare innovation away. We don't want to be like, this very rigid community that doesn't welcome, new thinkers and new innovators to our community. We don't want to do that. Otherwise, we're going to die. And so I would just encourage the entire community to kind of take a step back and think about DigiByte as a protocol layer. And the community can build whatever they want on top of that. And nobody inside the core developer community is going to push back on any of that. We want people to adopt and use our blockchain. So get at it. May the best innovator win.
Thanks for that. And I would like to piggyback on that answer with the education hour. I can't remember the number where we went over the DigiByte improvement protocol, the DIP, where you made a really strong point is, if you feel strong about something, be the champion of that thing. So
That's absolutely right.
I think that's if nobody's if everybody's kind of like tapped out with questions, probably full of turkey, but think about that, and please, we want these education hours to empower people who are listening, empower people who are listening to the recording, to encourage them to participate in the DIP process, to be a champion of what they want to build. And so I think that's a really good answer. I'm glad you clarified that for everybody. And I hope this hour has helped with some of the maybe questions about Taproot and what it means moving forward and what it means for assets. Anybody else have any last minute questions before we wrap up? Oh, go ahead.
I do want to leave with one thing. I think it is really unfortunate that Taproot has gotten focused on assets. I would challenge everybody on this call and the community more broadly to really dig into what Taproot is. It is more than assets. Assets is just one way to exploit Taproot that the Bitcoin community figured out. But there's a lot of smart contracts capability here that I think nobody is spending their energy talking about that they could, instead of talking about assets and NFTs and stuff like that. I think NFTs are great and all that stuff is fun, but there's so much more to Taproot than that stuff. So please try not to get so myopically focused on assets. There's a whole lot more here that Taproot unlocks. I'm not going to speak for others, but I know that there's some white papers hopefully coming here, this year coming up that I think will tap into what Taproot ultimately can do, and really push it to its limits. So I'm not going to speak for that. I'm going to let the authors of those talk to that when they're ready. But it's so much more than assets, everybody. So much more.
Love to hear GTO. One quick question, just because I think it wraps in, and you mentioned it yourself. Could you give some insight on who it is that raised the PR to activate Taproot? I think you mentioned.
I have no idea. I have no idea who that individual is. None.
Okay. I guess it's not important.
That's the
code
beauty.
is the important part. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to diminish that individual's PR at all. It really is just 4 lines of code that were changed, and it's just defining dates by which the activation window is open and closed. That code has been in 8.22 forever. I mean, since we merged it 4 years ago. The only difference is that the core developers, through an abundance of caution, decided to set the activation window like 1,000 years or something into the future. Like, it was ridiculous, basically effectively disabling it, right? But not removing the code. You can't remove the code, to be frank. The Bitcoin core code base is tightly coupled to Taproot's code. It cannot be removed. You can only deactivate it. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's a value for everybody on the call here, but just so you guys know that that code is never coming out. It's not possible. It's only possible to either activate it or deactivate it. And again, not to belabor it at all, but the miners have the final say, not the core developers. The miners, which I like to call they're the critical piece of the economic majority. You know, the node operators, the merchants, and the miners are the folks that really decide at the end of the day whether this code is going to activate or not.
Sounds good. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Good chat.
So yeah, I think thank you everyone for coming. Laura, if you want to wrap up now, it's 12:50 here in the West Coast. This chat will be posted on the YouTube channel, hopefully by tomorrow, and I'll be spreading it out there. Hopefully more people see it and we get the conversation going on socials and GitHub as well.
Awesome. Thank you always, Archie. You're just, I can't state your value enough for being the technical guru on these education hours and on the socials, and everybody who's, you know, trying to get the word out for people to join or to watch the recordings. And of course, thank you to GTO for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule to educate us all on this aspect. And I thought I've gotten a lot out of it today. I hope you all did too. But again, I just want to reiterate, you know, I think it's healthy and in the sake of decentralization, you know, go across all the socials and have those conversations. But, you know, if you're wanting to talk with the core developers, if you're wanting to have some serious discussion or concerns or productive conversation, you know, to steer that to the GitHub, to help that grow in a meaningful way. So I hope everybody has a wonderful Sunday, and thanks again. I love looking on the side on the left and seeing so many names. Sometimes we've done this with 3 people, so it's really always exciting to see when we have a real group join for these. So hope you have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining on a Thanksgiving Sunday. And definitely, you know, we'll see you online and hopefully see you in GitHub.